Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the new limited Sigret, and technically the death and ironic death of evasion, because Sigret also has to do with evasion. But all this and more, honestly, you're in for a jam-packed review of Sigret. I think she is one of the funniest looking characters that we've seen so far. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. So first things first, if you're curious about the base stats of Sigret, she is quite good. She has 118 base speed, which is okay, not the most insane relative, I guess, to some of the other openers. Of course, she isn't quite the same speed as an Amid or characters like the Rans, but that's okay. 118 base speed is close enough to a character like Conqueror Lilius, and as she's a thief, and as we see in a moment, this doesn't mean that she's super vulnerable. So let's go a little bit further. Aside from her design, which of course does look pretty cool, even though honestly, in my opinion, she doesn't really look like Pyrrha at all, the first thing that we actually have to talk about is her skill 2. Now, skill 2 is labeled appropriately as target lock. Now, first and foremost, if you couldn't basically tell by the fact that she got 30 effectiveness, she is a debuffer and she is more of an opener. As she reads here, though, after dispelling all buffs from the enemy, she has a 75, if I'm not mistaken, scaled up to 100% chance to inflict target for 2 turns. And again, this is pretty insane as this is attached to a soul burn, but while the inflicting of target and the new target, which removes or rather reduces evasion by a significant amount, is already insane, this also makes all allies except for the caster attack with a basic skill. Now, this on top of the combat readiness push sounds like a pretty jam-packed skill 1. This is a strip, a target, a basic attack, basically onto a guaranteed hit in most cases, you know, obviously because it's minus 50% evasion, and most characters have like a good chance of therefore being hit. But this on top of combat readiness is pretty crazy. Now, you might be curious what the purpose of the combat readiness is, and that's an even more insane skill 3, which reads as Flag of Victory. This is a dispel of 2 buffs from all enemies with a 100%, let me do the math, 80, 90, yes, with a 100% chance to inflict fear for 2 turns and decrease the combat readiness of enemies by 20%. Now, mind you, while the target from last turn was already pretty insane in terms of dealing a bunch of damage to a specific target, this now allowing you to fear the entire team is a little bit ridiculous. Now, granted, this doesn't just fear, which by itself, by the way, alongside a 20% AoE combat push backwards is already insane, but this gives you speed, and at the start of the battle also grants evasion to the Sigret as well. Now, just between these 2 abilities, this sounds like 2 characters put into one, really. You have effectively 2 opener abilities where you can permanently AoE fear the entire team, or you could permanently, target and lock down, a single character and remove them from the map pretty much turn 1. Now, in most cases, I understand why maybe some of you guys are thinking, oh, well, this is the death of evasion. But at the same time, I also think that as she does have evasion in her own kit, and as I'm sure people are going to be taking Sigret against other people as well, this is going to be somewhat of a goofy character to deal with. And though I think that her kit is really crazy, like I don't necessarily feel that the S2 is nearly as counterable, though I would imagine, though the S3 is fantastic, there are already characters in place to kind of deal with stuff like this, i.e., like you have to run the gambit against a high effect resistance Horizon Acades. This is where I think the S3 is a bit, I guess, like a bit counterable in a sense, but none of that really necessarily matters when, again, you can soul burn S2 and then one-shot the Acades, combat readiness push yourself ahead, and then and then fear the entire team. That said, as this character is only 118 base speed, and as she does very likely want to be faster than most other characters, I think this is going to be a character that isn't going to like overwhelmingly or guaranteed fear, or even like guaranteed debuff some of the high ER soul weavers in the game. I would imagine that even despite them showing Like even despite them showing off the Sigret here being able to S3 and fear someone like the Mercedes, there are some Mercedes that are built with high ER, and I would imagine, especially after with the like the introduction of Sigret, that many players are probably going to try and you know, build a Sigret that has, or rather build a Mercedes that has enough ER to survive an S3 from a Mercedes, or rather from a Sigret. I do want to say though that in terms of the landscape of the game, I cannot really see any more, I can't really imagine any more death to Setsuka advertisement than this. They've already introduced, or rather reworked, a few characters to have insane, you know, flexibility or insane viability alongside the target debuff. Most notably, Architect Leica is probably just going to one-shot any Setsukas on the map, but this is kind of the nail in the coffin alongside Saria, both of whom I think are obviously designed to kind of deal with the character. Now, what you're seeing on screen right here as well, I think was a little bit more generous in terms of cleaving. Admittedly, I don't know if, despite countering cleave, I don't know if this is necessarily a death to the current meta of things, as again, the Lady of the Scales Mercedes comps are really still insane. And outside of, again, having something like, you know, like a Celine with the Summer artifact or the Summer Hwayoung artifact, it doesn't necessarily feel that some of the answers are answered by Sigret, which is not necessarily a bad thing, as again, though, you know, obviously this is a character designed to counter Setsuka, and obviously in some ways supposed to counter evasion. The point is not to remake a new super giga OP character, which I think is actually a big dub for Smilegate. Now, again, that isn't to say that people won't probably find a 300 effectiveness way or a 300 effectiveness build to make Sigret OP, but at least from this sort of look or this sort of standing, despite her landing on every character here, I think there is going to likely be some sort of, you know, some sort of counterplay to this, whether it's a, you know, high ER character, or whether it's a character, or whether it's, you know, someone using something like, I don't know, like a non-attack prevention, or, you know, a Celine. I'm glad at the very minimum that she doesn't seem as overloaded, though I do think her design and her animations are fantastic, alongside having a clear niche into what she's supposed to counter. Now, as we move to her artifact, I think her artifact is also interesting, but like the practical application of this artifact seems to come from likely some sort of cheese, honestly. As you're seeing on screen right now, it's a 20% evasion, and after an ally uses a basic skill, you have a 100% chance to increase the combat readiness of the caster by 10%. Now, it says that this artifact skill effect can only apply to one hero within a team, which I'm assuming means that you can't stack it, but presumably then, if you have a team of 3 that have the ability to, you know, obviously basic, that does mean that after you use her S2, that would give you a 60% CR increase, if I'm not mistaken, which again, if you're really fast or if you're against like a really slow team, that could be really impactful, which I think is probably the intended purpose of Glorious Flag. But fortunately or unfortunately for people that care like that, this is a 100% or a scaling chance-based artifact, which is a little, it is what it is. It does feel a little bit bad, but I would say that this is likely one of the more impactful artifacts, is again, if you have the chance to get 30% extra CR, and that's what you need to cut the enemy team, I think that's going to be absolutely huge. Overall, though, in terms of what we've seen, honestly, for Sigret, her value as a character and as an opener, I think she's one of the more flexible characters that we've seen. Again, I don't want to harp too much about how realistic or unrealistic it is to tag a Mercedes here, but I guess in theory, since she doesn't really scale with anything else, and she is just, you know, speed based and she has evasion, you could argue that her main focus could just be being on speed and hit set, and maybe she could be in like that 250 to like, or like 200 to 250 to 300 effectiveness range. It just feels a little odd, as again, most Mercedes, or a lot of Mercedes that I fought against, are on something like Soul Constellation, or there may be like another character like, you know, that prevents themselves from dying but is also ER based, which makes things, you know, a bit more annoying. But in any case, as usual, she is also, of course, with her S2 restricted single target. So this might be a sort of situation where you have to deal with the Boss Arunca, and Boss Arunca is notorious, obviously, for also not dying. So there's a lot of levels to this. I think she's a great option or a fantastic addition to the game when it comes to dealing with Setsuka, but I think she's also well kept enough that I don't think she's necessarily going to break the game yet, as she doesn't add some sort of, you know, damage, share, ignore sort of aspect to the game yet. That said, and again, I want to preface this, AoE fear and target is still really insane. In any case, though, guys, that's my breakdown of the new Sigret. I think she looks cool. I think a lot of people will probably end up picking her because, well, mostly because I think a lot of Arena right now is surrounded by the Setsukas, but just keep in mind and bear in mind that despite this showcase showing off her being quote unquote you know, impactful against a character like the Mercedes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll actually be able to kill. So just keep that in mind, and obviously you could feel free, I guess, to use the team that they have on screen, but I'm sure that there are a lot of lineups or runs here where this won't actually work. There's a lot of like 15% nonsense going on here, including things like the you know, like whether or not Rwana will tag, things of this nature. But yeah, in any case, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.